Good morning. It is both exhilarating and inspiring to spend these next few weeks surrounded by the energy, dedication, and passion in this room. I cannot tell you that from this virtual community, although I would have loved to have us all here together in person, I draw so much strength and nourishment. To each of you, I offer a very warm welcome to Peak Parent Center's 2022 Conference on Inclusive Education. Yay! Thank you for your commitment to ensuring all students are educated with equity. Thank you for ensuring that all students have the access to supports to help them thrive in school and in life. Thank you for the impact you make in your homes, your classrooms, your schools, your communities, and our world. Our work makes a difference for all students, with and without disabilities. And the effects of what we do today will ripple throughout the many lives that we are all able to touch. For those of you who may not know me, I am Michelle Williams, the Executive Director of Peak Parent Center. When I took on this role about 1.5 years ago, I recalled Martin Luther King Jr.'s words, that we are all caught up in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. It's that reflection that I came to understand how my own family's personal story is directly linked to that history. I came to Peak with a 29-year career in management and administration of community development and youth serving organizations, including 22 years within the Big Brothers Big Sisters of America network, a leader in youth development, child safety, and protection. Before my big move to Colorado from New Jersey for this work, I served as the co-founder and chief operating officer of Big Brothers Big Sisters of Essex, Hudson, and Union counties in Newark, New Jersey. But despite the career, most importantly, I am a dedicated wife and a mom. In 2003, my true life journey began. Tragedy struck, and I could have run away. But I chose another alternative to be the change that I wanted to see in the world. My husband and I were expecting identical twin boys, and they came extremely prematurely at 23 weeks gestation. We lost a child, and one was in the neonatal unit for 6 months, weighing only 15 ounces, hanging on by a thread. Being born at
11 y él estaba muy delicado y eso fue lo que nos contribuyó mucho a mi hijo.
He has taught me the meaning of life and how I will change the world. He has taught me to be strong, never give up, and to make an impact on the world by taking up space and being your authentic self. Beck is now 19, and we are navigating the ups and downs of transition as he is set to graduate high school next year. Time seriously flies. As I reflect on what I have learned throughout his life, one aspect that stands out the most is the journey of being a parent of a child with disabilities and wanting to advocate for, protect, and ensure he gets every opportunity I know he deserves. And at the same time, learning to let go and let him be his own person with his own voice and to take up his own space. It is not easy. In the past few years, we at Peak have been not only providing parent training and information or these invaluable conferences on inclusive education, but we also have been reaching out to youth to work with them on building their own leadership and self-advocacy skills through our Project Power program. We have been working with individuals and families who are in the same stage as my son, transitioning into the real world and building a community of support through our personal networks for transition programs. We have been working closely with many organizations to take inclusion beyond schools, because as many of us know, inclusion is just one aspect of a person's life is not enough. In order for someone to truly take up space, to truly not only have a seat at the table, but an active voice that is valued and respected, we need the collective community, not only involved, but actively putting in the effort to give everyone the opportunity to use their own voices and take up space. One of my favorite quotes is by Robert Kennedy, and he says, "The future does not belong to those who are timid and fearful of bold projects and new ideas. Rather, the future belongs to those who can blend passion, reason, and courage in a personal commitment to the great ideals and enterprises of American society." When we talk about passion, reason, and courage, we are talking about each and every one of you. And those you hopefully will share what you glean from this conference. As Colorado's Parent Center, our mission is to meet the needs of Colorado families. And as those needs evolve, we strive to be intentional about supporting the social justice rights of the disability community, including the underserved populations within the disability community. This takes support, resources, and community involvement. As Helen Keller once stated, "I am only one, but still I am one. I cannot do everything, but still I can do something. And because I cannot do everything, I will not refuse to do something that I can do." Each of you here today works tireless hours to raise, educate, and serve our community. And for that, I salute and thank you. You are doing so much already, but today and over the next 3 weeks, I promise you will learn how you could take your experience and community passion to a whole different level. This conference will give us all an excellent opportunity to reflect upon the true meaning of inclusion and the impact it makes possible in our communities. We are beyond grateful for the support of generous donors, partners, sponsors, and our amazing team who make this all possible. It is all of you that are helping us move the work forward. So quick shout out to our amazing crew. I am amazed and appreciative to see all of you here in this virtual setting. We've got attendees representing 19 states. That's nearly half of our country. I'm so excited. And actually one country outside of the US. Wow. Thank you all for joining us. I know our conference is different this year, but we could still do so much together. As we kick off this conference, let's take on the spirit of Dr. Victor Pineda, who shared about the power of thinking critically about the barriers to true inclusion. He shared this message in October 2015 during his seminar at World Bank, at a World Bank event during the annual bank meetings in Lima, Peru, which is still very much relevant to the work that we do here at PEAK. Dr. Pineda is a well-known and respected disability advocate throughout the United States and internationally.
Cities of tomorrow should look like, but it also teaches some very important realities that many of us aren't aware of. For instance, today, 1 in 7 people in the world lives with some disability. Now, although strange life forms may exist on other planets, I can assure you that I did not come from Mars. Meaning that we're here. People with disabilities are your neighbors, they're your friends, they're your relatives. People with disabilities are here to lend a creative spirit and a spirit of problem solving. People with disabilities have a lot to contribute, and according to the International Labor Organization, the yearly cost of excluding people with disabilities from the workforce is close to $2 trillion. That's a lot of money, and that's a lot of wasted potential. You see, what all this points to is political will. political will to rethink through the structures of inequality and to actually start to document and address the systems that exclude people. People that may not be able to hear well or see well or move around without assistance are still people with dreams. You see, people with disabilities around the world are living full and productive lives. They're artists, they're financiers, they're entrepreneurs. You see, we go to the restaurants, we go to the theaters, we join our community events, and we don't need pity, nor do we need charity. And I certainly don't want to be seen as some kind of a medical abnormality, because I'm not. I'm just a victim. And I have dreams and desires and a mission to help change the world. You see, we know that human potential cannot be stopped. But what we need to do is make the decisions to ensure that it's not, that we identify those barriers that limit our potential. What we need here is for each one of you to join this fight. And what I want to do is to enlist you in working with me to promote equality and justice. Really, what I'm calling for is radical inclusion. And radical inclusion really is about dismantling those barriers, whether there's a couple steps in front of your shop, whether there's attitudes that are negative in your family that you can challenge people to think differently, or whether it's just thinking through hiring somebody at your employment and giving them a real chance to show their potential. Because by doing so, we're actively engaging in ending separation and in ending distinction and in acceptance.
What am I missing?
A world that allows us all to reach our dreams.
So what can we do to make inclusion happen? We need each of you to join us in this fight. Radical inclusion is about dismantling those barriers to open a world that allows us all to reach our dreams, a world that allows our young people to take up space. Throughout this conference, we challenge you to identify at least 2 ways you can dismantle a barrier and then put that into action to truly make inclusion happen. On that note, it is my extreme pleasure to introduce to you our first keynote speaker, Dr. Torie Weiston-Serdan. Torie truly believes that young people are everything. They are innovative, inquisitive, radical, and loving. When I heard Torie speak several times in my Big Brother, Big Sister days, her words that young people have so much to offer us and so much to teach resonated with me throughout my career. I am proud to have her take up space with us as a kickoff keynote speaker today. Dr. Torie Weiston-Serdan is a scholar and practitioner with over 15 years of teaching and youth programmatic experience, an emerging leader in the youth mentoring field. She wrote Critical Mentoring, a Practical Guide, a great read, which has become the handbook for culturally sustaining youth work in the discipline. Outside of teaching and research, Torie runs the Youth Mentoring Action Network, a nonprofit dedicated to leveraging justice and equity mentoring. Through her community-based work, she mentors Inland Empire youth through high school into college and careers. She also works extensively with other community-based organizations in support of their youth advocacy efforts, specializing in training mentors to work with diverse youth populations. As a scholar, she examines how marginalized and minoritized youth are served by mentoring and youth development programs. Torie is one of the founding board members for Mentor California and currently serves on the boards of California Endowment, Give, Build, Share, Big Brothers, Big Sisters, LGBTQ National Advisory Council, and the research board of the National Mentoring Research Center. Take it away, Torie.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I am so excited to be in virtual space with you all. And I just want to start by thanking the Peak Parrot team for just contacting me, for letting me do this. Amber, for all the follow-ups and all of that. The team has just been really amazing in building this conference. And I really hope that you all enjoy, because they put in a lot of hard work to make sure that this goes off without a hitch. Again, just really happy to be in community and happy to be just in space with folks. As Michelle kept noting, I know that we are virtual again, right? And that there's a lot of disappointment around really not being able to come back together. But I know that folks like Michelle and Amber have been working to make sure that when we are in virtual space, it does feel like we are still in person, right? And that we are still connected. And this is really important work that the pandemic cannot stop us from doing. This is important and essential work, right? That not being protected or cared for during this pandemic cannot stop us from doing. The work of making sure that young people are fully supported and resourced and have voice, power, and choice is work that the pandemic and no one else should be able to stop us from doing. And so again, just thankful, really thankful for this opportunity to speak with you, to sort of gear up the conference. The fact that I'm first, I'm kind of super excited about, because I get to bring all the energy and the fun. And there are a couple of really key things that I wanted to make sure I talk to you all about. But I also just want to be in sort of the spirit of being in community. I also want to be in conversation. And, you know, I know that there are a lot of us on this call. I was talking to the team earlier. There's over, 300 folks attending the conference. There's a bunch of folks listening to this keynote right now. But what I've learned in the virtual space is that it's even more important really to stop and connect with individuals, because we all have sort of been in our silo spaces. I'm in this little sort of shed in my backyard that I've made my office because it was a necessity for the work that we've been doing during the pandemic. And I know that all of us are filling in that same space. So I just want to be able to sort of interact with you all as much as possible. And we'll try to sort of manage that along the way. I want to start by telling you all just a little bit more about what I do and how I got into this work. I was a high school English teacher for over 15 years and at a local high school here in Southern California. And being a high school teacher was really one of the first ways that I learned to be a radical, a freedom dreamer, an activist, right? And I know that that might fit some of the folks' perception, as education gets this sort of really bad rap of being this sort of liberal bastion. But it wasn't that the space itself was encouraging that. It was that I was seeing on a daily basis such deep inequity that actually became more of my teacher, right? When I was teaching over 182 kids, or I should say young people, every year. They were coming in and out of my classroom every period. And I was listening to conversations and having conversations and watching how they had to interact with the school in different ways and watching the different obstacles and challenges that they were having to come across. Those things really informed me and opened up my eyes as an educator as to what young people are going through, what they're having to deal with, but also how so many of these institutions and systems just really aren't set up to provide the support that every young person needs. Some young people, but not all young people. And during the course of my career, I taught high school, so I taught everyone from freshmen who were about 14 to seniors who were 17, 18. I taught young people who were maybe identified, I will put that in quotes, as low achievers for whatever reason, to students who were gifted, right? Or in advanced placement courses. And I also recognized the very obvious ways that the school treated each of those students, depending on sort of how they were labeled. Right? And it just gave me one of my first insights outside of sort of being Black and queer and having my own lived experiences. It gave me one of my first insights about how other folks navigate these institutions and what their services and what their resources and what their support looks like. And one of the after learning that lesson, I think one of the early sort of strategic actions that I realized that I could take as an individual teacher was, to the point of this conference, making sure that my young people, or the young people that I had access to, learned how to take up space, that they learned how to utilize their voices, that they learned how to get the information they needed, that they learned where to get resources and access and things that they needed to be able to either push back or advocate or do what it was that they needed to get the best education possible, or the education that they felt they deserved. And so really it was in the high school classroom where young people and what young people experienced taught me what I know about youth work and about equity work, and about all of the sort of work that I do today. So I got to shout out young people for teaching me, and I got to shout out young people for their patience with me as I learned and stumbled and fell in a lot of different opportunities. And I'm just thankful and in this sort of space of gratitude for how young people sort of ushered me into the work that I ultimately ended up doing. So after teaching high school English for 15 years, I started a nonprofit organization called the Youth Mentoring Action Network. And I always tell folks this really important story about our founding, which is that we started our nonprofit. We started our nonprofit as sort of a school-based mentoring program. And the whole point was to just make sure that students who didn't have resources or access were able to get that. And so I was also on a PhD program at the time, and I was doing all of the reading on what makes a good mentoring program and what are the best practices. And I was reading all the guides, right? And I was just doing all the research. And I thought that I designed this perfectly solid mentoring program. And I basically did mentoring to young people for 1 year. And I use that word very intentionally, that I did mentoring to young people for 1 year. And at the end of that year, probably the only thing that I did well or did right was to ask young people what their experience was and to give me feedback and to help me understand, what could go better in this process. And the reason I say that was the best thing that I ever did is because that's when young people really took the opportunity to teach me, right? And one of the key things, or a few of the key things they said, kind of have stuck with me and have helped us to build the Youth Mentoring Action Network in a very youth-centered way. So one of the first things that they said to me was that they didn't see mentoring in the same way that we saw mentoring, right? They said, well, you kind of see mentoring as this academic exercise. All the adults in our lives are always telling us to do well in school. We get that all the time. I really want my mentoring basically to be more personalized to me, right? I want to be able to tell my mentor what I need, and I want my mentor to be able to support me in that endeavor. So really, one of the first things they were asking for was agency, right? Was to be able to dictate or to be a part of their mentoring service, to have voice, right? To not have mentoring done to them, right? So that was one of the first things. The other thing was that they very explicitly stated that they felt like they didn't get a lot of support with equity or social justice issues. That, a lot of the young people that I was serving were Black, Latinx, and they kept saying to us, you tell us to do well in school, and you tell us that, our job is to show up on time and be good in class and do all of our work and all of those things, but you're not telling us how to overcome or how to deal with the obstacles of systemic inequity, right? And they didn't use those words per se, but they were a little more real, right? They said, yeah, like I have this teacher who's racist. She never calls on me, or she says these really nasty things in class, or there's another teacher who says really terrible things about LGBTQ students, right? And I'm queer and I'm having to go into that class every day and I have to navigate that, right? So you're telling me to do well in school and perform well academically, but you're really not telling me, how do I overcome these particular situations? Or how do I feel safe or advocate for myself in spaces that are uncomfortable for me, or in spaces where I really feel like maybe the adults or other people don't want me there. And it struck me as something that was really, it was impactful, and struck me as something that was particularly important, because I realized at that point that everything that I thought about mentoring, and even really about teaching, was about fixing young people, but not helping them navigate the whole entire context of what was around them. And I started kind of thinking about all the mentoring research that I had read and all the statistics around mentoring and sort of the way we market mentoring. And it started to line up to me that the whole focus of mentoring, at least as I had understood it, was really about, how can you help young people be better? How can you help them dress better? How can you help them study better? How can you help them be more attentive in school, right? How can you do all these things that change them? And there were almost zero conversations about what it meant to help young people navigate this more general context that was really navigating race and class and ability and gender and sexuality and sort of all of these issues that even as adults we struggle with. But somehow we were expecting young people to just sort of overcome and still be successful. So they taught me some really important lessons in that first year. And those lessons have stuck with me and have helped me to create an organization that it really deals with and puts at the forefront issues of identity, so that we don't ignore that in our mentoring process, but we center it and we make sure that we are helping young people navigate accordingly, right? So I'm not just gonna look over race or gender or sexuality or ability, but I'm going to talk about that, right? I'm gonna talk about the very real ways in which those identities are impacted for these young people and how I can support them through that. And not just how I can support them through that, but being a thought partner and a co-conspirator in helping them challenge these issues, right? So it's not enough for me to just say, hey, Susie, hey, Mark, hey, John, like, glad you're doing better in school, or I wish you would be showing up to that class on time more often. We need to have more intentional conversations about what young people are actually going through. And I think that if Freedom Summer didn't teach us anything, it should have taught us that young people are very much thinking about equity issues. And they're not just thinking about them, they're acting on them. And I think that summer, they also taught us that they're holding us accountable, right? They're holding us accountable to making real change. They are tired of trying to still clean up the messes that we have left behind because we cannot get it together and we cannot imagine an equitable world where everyone has a seat at the table, where everyone has a voice, and where everyone has power. Young people are showing us what that looks like. They are modeling what it means to take up space. And so for me, my encouragement of you today is not about how we can really be more active in terms of, and I know this is going to sound terrible at first, but bear with me, right? It's not how we can be more active and sort of like pushing young people to the side and taking over again. But it's actually about us learning how to center ourselves in a completely different way, which is how can we be the best allies? How can we be the best co-conspirators? How can we be the best resourcers? How can we help to lift young people up so that they can be the change, right? It's not that we're tapped out and that there's nothing left for us to do, but sometimes a lot of the work that we need to do is with us. And that's one of the most important lessons that young people taught me. It was just this idea that, we're glad that you thought up all these things, like you had great intentions, and we love you for really trying to help us. But it would have been nice if you had asked us what we needed, since we're the ones being mentored. It would have been nice if you would have asked us what resources that we would have liked, since, we're the ones who are supposed to benefit from this whole process. So many young people raised their hands and said, this is a college-based academic mentoring program. What if I don't want to go to college? What if I don't think college is for me? Whose idea was that? Let's have a conversation about that, right? What if I don't want to make a six-figure income and be a professional? Like, what if I'm really fine with a trade? And what if I think I can work a trade and actually own my own business and make good money? What happens if I want to be an entrepreneur and I don't want to sort of clock in, right, for someone else? So I had all of these traditional ideas. They were rooted in my own middle classness. They were rooted in my own values as a college graduate. You know, again, I will say I was doing mentoring to young people. They were rooted in all of my ideas. I was taking up all the space. And it wasn't until that first year and that moment of asking young people what they really needed that they said, really what we need from you as our mentor is to listen, is to support us, be there when we ask you to be, right? Some young people said, sometimes I need to be pushed, but I want to tell you where I need to be pushed. I don't want you pushing me based on what you think I should be doing, right? They said, we want to have honest conversations. We're tired of the adults around us sort of avoiding all of the chaotic discussions because it's too controversial or because they're afraid in some way, right? Like, we want to have honest discussions. I want to understand all of these things so I can make decisions about what I want to do. And one young man, I will never forget, told me, you know, all my life, adults tell me what to do and how to do it. And then on this magic day that I turn 18, I'm supposed to think for myself, go out and vote for the next president, you know, get a job, get an apartment, make all of these adult decisions. But my entire life, I've never been in training to be an adult. No one's ever given me an opportunity to speak for myself or to say what I want or what I need or to practice, you know, what it means to sort of figure out what I'm going to do on my next levels. And so we really do have a responsibility as adults, I say as elders. Some folks get upset about the word elder. But however you want to say seasoned, there's a bunch of different ways people want to say wise, okay? But I think there's a responsibility that we have to be good co-conspirators and good partners, and to encourage young people to take up space and to use the platforms and the resources that we have to make sure that young people have voice, power, and choice. We have to do this intentionally. We have to do this in an intersectional way, which means we have to consider the various identities. And this is not about what folks are calling the oppression Olympics. This is not about, you know, like who gets minimized or oppressed the most, but it's about making sure that we actually curate spaces where we've been intentional and thoughtful about how every single person in the space can access it, and how every single person in the space can find it meaningful, and how every single person in the space can participate in the ways that they want to participate. We've been very lazy, I think, too often. Oh, we'll just do the standard thing because, you know, this is what we do. And I've heard so many adults in spaces say to young people, well, that's just always what we've done, which I think is one of the dumbest things we could ever say. Just because you've been doing it doesn't mean it's good. It doesn't mean it's right. And it doesn't mean that it's the way the future should look. And so much of what we do as adults is we problematize young people for wanting better. Oh, these young people, they're so soft. You know, when I was going to school, I didn't have a computer. I love hearing the stories about the library access. That's my favorite one, where folks who are more seasoned say, oh, we couldn't Google anything. We had to go in the library and we had to look through all those little catalog cards, and then we had to go up the stairs and pull. And it's like, you know what? Just because you had a difficult and hard time accessing something does not mean that that should be the standard. It doesn't mean that the young people coming behind you should have to sort of go through this process what do they call it in sororities and fraternities? Like these hazing processes so that they can look up a resource. We live in 2022. Thank God we don't have to go through catalog cards anymore. Thank God that I can hop on Google or access my iPhone and find information in less than 10 seconds. That is a wonderful thing, right? And so we need to stop sort of giving the status quo concept that like, just because you endured something and just because you had to, and I'll be very honest and transparent here, just because you had to endure trauma and harm and violence in different places in your life does not mean that the young people coming behind you should have to. And while we're on that subject, there's a lot of work that we need to do to unpack the violence and the trauma and harm that's often been done to us as we have come of age, so that we don't do it to the young people who are coming behind us. Which is actually one of my next points. I said I was going to put an after guide together, so I'm taking notes over here, Michelle, for all the things that I want to make sure that you follow up on. We've got most of the work that we need to do, and this, again, this is hard for folks to hear sometimes, has absolutely nothing to do with young people. Most of the work that we need to do really has everything to do with us. We have so much unpacking to do. We have so much reflection to do. We have so much understanding to gain. We have a lot of learning and reading and education that we need to do for ourselves so that we can kind of unpack where we are and figure out what we need to do to show up better as elders in these spaces, as allies, as co-conspirators. On a daily basis, I'm having to learn how to shift my language, right? We were just talking earlier, I'm really focusing right now on using gender neutral language as much as possible, right? My young people are holding me accountable to that. Like, you need to chill out because everything that you say is like on the binary, right? It's like right there. And so I'm trying to learn to say folks, right? I'm trying to learn to say family. I might have to get some water in a second, sorry. I get passionate, I start yelling, and then my voice. Give me a second, you all. But I'm trying to teach myself to use more gender neutral terms so that every young person that I'm working with feels safe. So that I don't just say a general guys and exclude everyone else, right? But these are things that I've had to learn. And one of the things that I had to do, even in this learning process, was to ask myself why I do it, right? Why do I always just use guys? So I had to kind of do some unpacking and some self-work. Well, it's normalized. Well, I've been doing it for, most of my life. I guess it was the way I was socialized. I never thought about it. And then going from there, because I feel like that's the easy part, then going from there to challenging myself about why I won't let it go, right? I recognize, okay, now I recognize why I do it. It feels normalized, I have all these reasons. Well, why is it so hard for you to let that go? Why are you unable to release it, given the knowledge that you have about wanting to have opening and welcome spaces for everyone on the gender spectrum? Why are you still holding on? Is it habit? Is some of it resistance? Because you don't really understand those various genders, and so you don't want to wrap your head around, why you should use non-binary terms? Is it fear? So really just having to do my own individual work about what it means to show up better. So maybe I understand what it feels like to be queer, but maybe I don't understand what it feels like to be non-binary, right? Maybe I don't understand what it feels like to be transgender. And so maybe just because I don't understand it doesn't mean that I shouldn't be welcoming and affirming, and that I shouldn't create spaces where everyone feels like they can be a part of it, right? It's not them that has to fix anything. They need to show up who they are. It's me who has to do the work. It's me who has to recognize that they have voice, that they are humans, that they deserve respect, that they deserve affirmation of their identity and who they are. And in the same way that I want people to
Como
respect
ellos son, así como yo quiero que protejan a mí mismo las personas, y también quiero que ellos también sean protegidos. Entonces, yo no les estoy preguntando a ellos que hagan algún trabajo. Yo no les estoy preguntando a ellos que ellos nos dejen, nos convenzan por qué para tomar espacio. No les estoy pidiendo que me muestren documentos para que me ayuden a mí a comprenderlos a ellos.
to figure out how I can be better. Right? And when we talk about identities, this really cuts across everything, right? It's cutting across ability, it's cutting across race, it's cutting across gender, sexuality, and all of these sort of different elements, because at the end of the day, humanity is what it is. And we have to have a firm belief in order to do this work and do this well, that every single human being deserves to exist. And that every single human being deserves to have a place. And that every single human being deserves to have their voice heard. To have power in decision-making. To be able to dictate their own services, right? This shouldn't be rocket science. And yet, here we are, right? So again, my challenge for us really is to continue to ask ourselves, how can I show up better? What work do I need to do to be the best co-conspirator and the best ally? Since I may understand ability on a certain level because I have a relationship to it, how do those lessons teach me how to show up better in terms of race or class or sexuality, right? Since I understand race really well, how do those lessons help me to show up better as an ally or co-conspirator for people in the ability community, right? Or the disabilities community? How does that help me to show up better? How do we learn the language that we need to learn, right? How do we support one another that way? What do we need to understand there? You don't like to read, there are podcasts. You don't want to hear you don't want to read physical books. There's podcasts, there's Audible, right? That's the other thing, is folks will make an excuse for why they don't learn anything. There's Google. There are limits to Google, but still that's a start. There are limits to Google though. Deeper research is required, but it's a start, right? But how do we learn things? And the other thing is, how do we learn how to be called in? Right? And that's another sort of interesting concept right now. Because we are in this space where young people especially, not just young people, but young people especially, they've had it, they're fed up, they're like, look, we're not gonna be quiet anymore. You didn't say that right. I need to tell you. And that's where so much of the conversation often stops, because we're ego-driven, we're sensitive, you know, sometimes, oh, well, I have good intentions, all of those things. Yes, but you still made a mistake. And chop it up to humanity, right? You still made a mistake. And so how do we hold ourselves accountable? And how do we make sure that we create spaces where we hold each other accountable, and where it's okay to call folks in and say, you know what, that language didn't quite sit right with me. I think maybe this language might be better. And sometimes there might be a whole debate, right, about who thinks what language works well, right? Because there are also sometimes disagreements within communities. Well, again, even when those disagreements happen within communities, there's learning, right? Now I understand why. So I use my own experiences to explain these things. I've, as a sort of younger, LGBTQ person am completely okay with using the word queer. There are a lot of my older LGBTQ friends that are not at all okay with using the word queer, because in their upbringing, queer was used to attack them. They were beat up and called queer. You know, they were bullied and called queer. That is a word that they will forever associate with negativity, right? With like a hate term, etc. Whereas my generation has come along and we have said, oh, well, we will sort of reclaim this word of queer and we'll use it as a power term. And now people won't be able to hurt us with it because we will proclaim ourselves as queer. But that is a different perspective from a different generation of people who didn't get beat up and called queer as they were getting beat up. So we have different perspectives about that word, right? Both can be used. But my listening and the discussion that happens within the community lets me know that when I'm addressing one of my elders in the LGBTQ community, I probably should not be using the word queer. Maybe it's okay to use it with my peers. It's not okay to use it with some of my elders in the community, and to have a certain level of respect and appreciation for that. But having to get called out personally around that word by some of my LGBTQ elders helped me recognize, okay, so we have a disagreement even amongst ourselves, but in that disagreement, I've learned some things about what they carried on my behalf in this next generation and why I get to embrace the word queer, because they did all the hard work for me, right? And it's the same with all of these other sort of identifiers and the way that language is evolving, that we have to learn and be comfortable with that language evolving and changing. And we have to learn to get comfortable with people saying, I don't like that you use that term and here's why. And let's have a conversation about it. For me, getting called out is the best thing because it's always a learning opportunity. Even if I disagree, I need to hear your perspective. And there's no way that I can show up and say that I am a person who wants to build community and who wants to make everyone feel safe and affirmed and included, and then not be okay when you have conversations that are honest and forthright about your ideas and your needs and what you, require to feel safe in this space. We've got to get past this idea that we got caught being wrong, right? Like we have to get past this discomfort with having difficult conversations when folks show up and they say, I don't like this or I don't like that, right? We have to get more comfortable with being called in. That's the way we move forward. We can't have these difficult conversations. How do we get to the space, right? How do we get to the space where everyone is feeling included? We say so often in our movement building that, oh, everyone's gonna have a safe space in this place. And then as soon as someone says something that upsets us, then all of those rules go out of the window, right? We've gotta stay in a place where we are accountable to each other, where we are in community. And when we are in community, we have loving discussion, we have loving debate, we have calling in, and that's part of the process. And it's healthy. And that's how we grow. That's how we develop. I realize already I've been talking for 35 minutes because I be on my soapbox, y'all, and I'm sorry about that. It is a keynote, so technically it's what I'm supposed to be doing, but I definitely want to interact a bit more around some of these issues because I think it's important for us to be in community and to have conversation. And, for me, there's a lot of learning exchange that happens when you don't center one person and you're sort of able to share experiences. And I have a real question about youth voice. And I will say that just to help the organizers, because Amber, I know that Michelle, I know you folks are like on this part. How about I give people a chance to do it either in chat or maybe we take a few hands? But I want to talk about one of the first, or one of the points that I raised, which was around doing your own work, right? And I want to ask the folks in the audience, can we talk about that and process that a little bit in terms of what does it mean to do your own work? And you can either put comments in the chat, or if you want to use the hand raise feature, I would love to hear from a few folks. I know there's a lot of folks in the audience. We probably won't get to everyone, but if anybody wants to speak, I would love to be able to hear voices. And if you just use the hand raising feature, then the team will be able to navigate that and see you. So really want to open up this discussion about what it means to do your own work. Let's start there.
Torie, do you see Monique?
I do.
Hi, Tory. I'm Monique. So nice to hear you. Always a pleasure. Trying to see how to lower my hand. Okay, yes. So when I think of doing your own work, to me that means getting really uncomfortable with self, like challenging the stories you have about yourself and your past, and challenging your beliefs. Like, this is what I believe. Why do I believe this? And really breaking that down. Or this is the story I tell myself about my childhood and my trauma. And is that story the true story or just a perspective of the way I saw it? And just really getting uncomfortable in self. I feel like if you're too comfortable with where you are, then you need to start kind of challenging that space a little bit. And not saying that just destroy every story and every belief you have, but really challenging and questioning, why am I showing up this way? And what is beneficial in it for the people around me? How are they going to perceive this or get in alignment with me if I continue to show up this way? And why am I showing up this way? So for me, it's all about uncomfortability. When I find myself being too comfortable in a space, I always challenge that a little bit, like, okay, what is this story? What is this belief, and why is it? And if it's okay, then it's okay. And if it's not, then kind of seeing what the alternative is to that belief or that story that I'm telling myself about my childhood or about my trauma, or again, about my political standards or educational standards. So that's what I think of.
Thank you so much, Monique. I appreciate that. And yes, to all of it. Now, Amber, do I call on folks or are you calling? I'm not sure how you want me to do it.
Well, we have Amanda Matson next.
Hi, Amanda.
Hi, forgive me. I feel all thumbs trying to figure out these technical. First of all, thank you. I'm enjoying your presentation. I think for me, being a parent with 3 special needs children, for me, doing my work is not settling for how it's assumed that these are the maximum amount of services, that this is just how we do it. I have family members who were in, quote, special education, and it was really crappy education. And so a lot of that conversation is, oh, well, that's just how it is. Or even when I'm speaking to private professionals who provide private services to my children, but they've worked in the school district, they'll tell me things like, well, just remember, that's not how it works in the school. So blah, blah, blah. And so for doing my work is not settling and getting uncomfortable, like she said. Yes, Miss Shirley, low expectations. I think that's what we're fighting. So doing my work is pushing into that uncomfortableness and saying respectfully, no, that's not okay. That's not okay. And it's hard.
Thank you for that, Amanda. And it is hard. I think very few of us actually sign up to be activists, right? but then different situations in our lives require us to be activists.
Yes.
Mhm.
Tiffany?
Oh, did I wasn't sure if my hand actually raised. I wasn't sure how to do that. This is wonderful. I think this is such a profound topic and such a real talk that so many people need to have. And it's so hard, you know, oh, sorry, I'll turn my, there I'm open. So I appreciate that. And as the parent of a neurodiverse child, you struggle in so many areas and feel overwhelmed. I think for me, you know, I had the opportunity to sit down with an adult who's autistic and to be able to be vulnerable in the questions. And it was hard. And I asked him, I said, I hope you don't mind, but help me understand what it's like that you go through, what you experience. Do you experience sadness when my son isn't asked to play, or if he doesn't have friends? And I know everyone's different, but it was just having this real talk to say, I hope I'm not offending you by asking these questions, but how can I ask it to find out more and get deeper and really understand, to try to figure out or see what the perspective from my son and what he might be going through. So as I look at him and, you know, when he brushes off these kids and, you know, is getting all, you know, really annoying them and nobody's wanting to engage with him, how is that making him feel? So I think for me, it's just opening a new door to say, can we just sit down and have this real conversation? Because I don't know what it's like. I don't know what that means. And though he might be expressing something differently, can you share with me? And it was such a great conversation, but we also have to know that it's tough for people to say, I don't know what you're going through. I don't know what it's like to be gay, or, you know, I don't know what that experience can be. Help me to understand so we can see with our eyes wide open. So that's been impactful for me.
And thank you for that. It's the helping me understand part. Oh, admitting I don't get it all, right? But there are things I need to learn. Thank you.
Tory, what we had in the chat box from Millie, being an activist means expressing exactly how you feel when others make comments that make you feel hurt or defensive. And I don't see any other hands up. Oh, we got one from Caitlin.
So I get like super nervous and then I like fight myself on whether or not I'm going to actually put my hand up. But in my first teaching job, like I currently teach in Colorado, and my first position was actually in a at-risk middle school in Tennessee. And so like just hopping into that, there were lots of things that I thought I knew and I didn't really know. And I didn't realize, and since being in Colorado, I've attended a lot of inclusive trainings. I've attended a lot of trainings on how to address my own like microaggressions that I didn't necessarily realize that were there until they were called out. So that's something like I've worked on myself over the past like 2 years. And I've noticed like a huge change in the cultures in my classroom now that I have, you know, you don't realize that you have a microaggression because those are like handed down through your families. And when it's taught to you and it's ingrained in your culture, like it's really hard that you don't realize, like you give someone like a weird sideways glance, or you like expect something different from somebody because of, you know, their race or their disabilities or whatever that is, or their sexual orientation. And so coming to conferences like this and attending those trainings have made me a better teacher. They have made me a better parent. I work really hard I have 3 sons, and I work really, really hard with my kids when they have a microaggression against somebody. And I'm like, but why do you feel like that? Like they've heard it from somewhere, whether it was something that they've heard from our family or something like that. Like, why do you feel that way? And my kids are young. And so we recently had, they called it Nerd Day at school, where they had to dress up like a nerd. So I saw your eyebrows raise. I was now that I have done this, like in the past, that hasn't bothered me. And then this year I saw it on the paper and I'm like, why are we calling that Nerd Day? And so I asked my kids, I'm like, well, what does a nerd look like? Because, you know, like I'm trying to undefine that informal definition of nerdiness, and that it's, you know, somebody with a tucked in polo, suspenders, and broken glasses who's really weird and nobody wants to be their friend. When really nerds rule the world and they make all the money. So we want to be nerds. So like after talking to my sons about this, I was like, you know, why do y'all feel this way? And they're like, well, they didn't really know. It was just like the perception that that's what it was supposed to be like. And so we made a point that one of my sons chose to dress up in that like typical like nerd outfit. And then my 6-year-old was like, well, can I wear a mohawk to school today? I was like, yes. And so my 6-year-old has bright blue Poseidon colored hair. And he wore a black t-shirt, red skinny jeans, and some Converse with a giant blue mohawk. And I emailed his teacher and I was like, I want you to know that he is dressed up in a non-stereotypical nerd outfit today. And I don't want him being left out of like class counts or class photos or anything like that, because we're redefining what that looks like. And so we've spent a lot of time as a family talking to our kids about not defining people based off of their experiences or the color of their skin or any stereotypes that people have placed on them. So I think that that's my part of like doing my job, is not only just working with our future generations, the children that were given to me to raise up, but I also spend time with my students. I teach 8th grade and they're in this really like uncomfortable, like developmental stage. And I've had students who dress up in this like skater, like they really like riding their skateboard and listening to punk rock music and all these cool things. And I've asked them before, I'm like, well, what peer group do you think I belonged to when I was in middle school? And of course, because my hair is blonde and I dress professionally because I'm a teacher, I got pegged as being like the cheerleader popular type. And I was like, actually, I hung out with the punk rock skater kids and wore skinny jeans and had dark black hair. And then they were just completely mind blown. And so we spend time talking about those things and not allowing people's perceptions of us to define who we are. So I appreciate you letting me like talk for just a minute. I have absolutely loved listening to you. And I just really appreciate you taking time out of your day to try to talk to this many people so that we can continue to better ourselves, so that we can better our culture and our communities and, you know, do what's best for our kids.
Thank you so much. And thank you for the work you're doing.
We also have Zamora who has her hand up.
Gracias. En primer lugar, quería decir gracias a Parent Center por la oportunidad a las personas.
First of all, I wanted to say for the opportunity for those of us that speak Spanish to listen and participate on this conference. Second of all, I wanted to mention what has happened to me as a parent. I consider that sometimes we trace the line from protection to overprotection from our kids. I'm not sure if this is fine. It's being listened in Spanish.
We do. That's what we were just checking in to make sure she was going to interpret that for us.
Okay, for sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, this is Norberto Piña, interpreter speaking. Can you guys hear me?
Amber, they need to pick English in the world, little world icon, and then you'll hear the interpretation simultaneously. So if you, disculpa Xiomara, no escucharon, pero puedes empezar de nuevo.
I can go ahead and interpret for the English part.
Okay.
First of all,
I wanted
would
to
like
thank
to
you
say,
all.
I want to say thank you for Peak Parents.
People from Peak,
This
it
is
is a great opportunity for us.
Este tipo de conferencias para que las personas de habla hispana podamos ser parte de estas conferencias. Muchas gracias.
Be included as well. Thank you
Can
so
listen
much
to
for
it. Thank
that.
you.
And
Second of all, I wanted
talk
to
about
share my own experience. I feel that
Sometimes
sometimes
parents cross that
us
thin
parents
line,
trace that
thin
little
line
line,
of
meaning
overprotection and
protection and overprotection to
too
our
much
kids.
being
And
overprotective.
that
porque no los permitimos llegar a lo que usted conversaba sobre que ellos puedan desarrollarse mejor y aprender.
To be able to grow,
give our kids the opportunity to
develop more
learn
themselves
about.
and learn.
That has happened to me.
There's a lot of times I do a
Sometimes
lot
it
of
happens
things
that I
for
do a lot
my
of things
son,
on
and
my
at times
own.
when I
And when I
allow
let my
him to
kids
do it
try
for
to do it on his
himself, I
own,
can see that
I
he has the
realize that he
ability to do
doesn't
that
know
for
how to do
himself.
it or
That's
cannot
what
do
I
it.
learned.
So
That
that's
is
something
something that
this
I keep in mind
presentation has given me
because
a lot
I
of
need
impressions
to
on
reframe
how do I
my
need
way
to
of being with my
reestablish
son.
the way
Thank you
I
so
do
much.
things. So it sounded as a great conference for me. Thank you very much.
Did you get that, Tory?
I think I did it. Sometimes I heard two voices, but I think I got it. So thank you. No, thank you so much. First, there's so much that everyone said that I just kind of want to like bring, make sure that I sort of encapsulate for the group. And notice that we heard a range of everything from like, kind of questioning your own stories, right? Being in community with other folks around your own work, making sure that you're talking to your young people around this, checking yourself and why you think about certain things, right? Like basically what everyone had to say was that there are various ways in which we can do our own work and show up better in this world, right? And they gave us examples and they're all doing it right. Right? That's one of the things I want to say too, is they're all doing it right because they're all doing it in the way that makes sense for them in this moment. And they're all doing it in a way that means that there's growth and development in this area. One of the things too that I appreciate about being in community with you all is that I feel like there are so many elements that you all see that other folks don't see, right? Whenever I'm talking to folks who are either have marginalized identities or are working with people or loving people that have marginalized identities, I feel like there's a level of superpower there. Because we see something that maybe identities that are more normalized or accepted don't. We see the way society behaves in ways that people that are more accepted or normalized don't, right? We see, I like how Caitlin said, like the little side eyes and glances, the microaggressions, right? We see all of those small things that people whose identities are normalized or more accepted don't see. There's a superpower there that allows us to have a level of love and compassion for other folks whose identities are marginalized, because we know what society can look like, right? When it doesn't necessarily love us. That should give us more potential to love. That should give us more potential and openness to be accepting. That should give us more potential and openness to be affirming. That should actually already be a level, I think, of our self-work. I mean, I on a regular basis, and again, I'm giving you my experiences because I can only speak from my experiences. But when I think of my experience as a Black person, my experience as a woman, my experience as a queer person, how in the world am I in any position at all to oppress someone else? There's no way. I know too much about what it means to be in a body where folks see me a certain way or where society behaves a certain way toward me, that there's no way that I can go out and replicate that and be oppressive toward other marginalized identities. It doesn't make sense. I know too much about what it means to be on the other side, right? So sometimes my self-work is making that connection, right? I don't know what it feels like to be neurodivergent, but I do know what it feels like to be queer, right? They're not the same thing, but I understand, right? What it feels like to be different to someone else. I understand what it feels like to not maybe be accepted by other folks. I understand what it feels like to maybe have a bunch of rules around you for what's normal, right? And then to have to try to navigate that. So I may not know what it means to be neurodivergent, but I get enough about what it means to be an oppressed identity that I should be an ally or a co-conspirator to that person because I get the struggle. That's a superpower that y'all have, that you have to hold on to, and that you have to embrace, and that you have to have at the sort of forefront of your work, that as you're working for the folks that you know and love, recognizing how what you're experiencing aligns with so much of what other folks are experiencing. And what does it look like for us to be a collective? And what does it look like, right, for us to see each other in such a way that we decide that we will collectively fight to make sure that we can both live in a safe, loving, affirming world, so that we can all live in a safe, loving, and affirming world. One of the things, and we're going to talk some more, but one of the things that I've been thinking about right now that young people have really inspired me to think about is this concept of radical imagination, of dreaming. To stop asking what things look like now, or kind of, I talked about this earlier, to stop sort of focusing on what things have always looked like. What does it mean to dream up what's possible? One of the powers that young people have, one of their superpowers, especially the youngest of the young, is that all of the limitations haven't been established yet. So they have these incredible imaginations where like everything's possible until we tell them it's not. I've been trying as much as I can in this next sort of phase of my work to be in a space to dream. What would it look like if we weren't always fighting and we had everything we needed? What would that world look like? What would it feel like? What would it look like to enter into spaces and feel safe? To have everyone feel safe? What would it look like if, didn't matter where you came from or who you were just respected and affirmed for your humanity? What would that world look like? What would it feel like? What would it taste like? Right? Like I think about when little kids are drawing and they have like, you know, blue suns and they have purple skies and they have things, and we always go, what is that? Oh, that's not a chair. That's, you know how we like start putting them in boxes? That's not the sun. The sun isn't blue. The sun is orange, right? But they have this incredible ability to imagine all these possibilities. And sometimes I think what our problem is that we are almost so centered in the fight, which is important. Don't give up the fight. But we are always so centered in the fight, we forget to imagine the possibilities. Because when we get to the end of the fight, what do we get? right? And especially because it's Black History Month, I've been thinking a lot about this in relationship to abolition. There are all these conversations being had about abolition right now. And we're talking about abolition in present day, but we're not thinking about the historical tradition that is abolition, right? Our first abolitionists were here to eradicate a violent system of slavery. And those folks were not just occupied with the fight of ridding this country of slavery. They were at the very same time tasked with imagining what an entire country could look like without it. That required imagination, because you were talking about a country that was pretty much founded with enslavement at its very core. It was the whole economy, was the way. So think about all of the things that have been said. This is the way we've always done things. All of these things that we end up saying to young people all the time. Well, we've always done it this way. What other way are we going to do it? Well, that's always the way our institutions have been. Why would we change it? Right? They weren't just fighting to eradicate slavery. They were dreaming. They were imagining what was possible. What could an economy look like if it wasn't on the backs of free labor from enslaved Africans? What would that mean for an entire economy of people who came from all over the world? Would it mean an increase in pay and benefits for industrial workers in the North? Would it mean more jobs to go around for everyone, since folks who were in the agricultural South really couldn't, there were limited job possibilities for them because we had free labor? What was possible? What would America look like? The abolitionists were not just fighters, they were dreamers. And I think that we've got to take that same abolitionist spirit with us, right? What's possible for you? What's possible for those young people you're serving? What's possible for your children? What's possible? When the fight is over, what's possible? What does liberation look like? What does freedom look like? What does love look like? What does an institution that doesn't limit you look like? What is an education that is not bounded and tied up, right? Or cut off, has a red rope around it for special people? What does that education look like? For me, that's the next level of this, right? I know we still got a lot of fighting to do. I've never backed down from a fight. I'm down. I'm good with that. But I've been spending a lot of my time thinking about what happens when this fight is over. What do we create? What do we build? Because if we end up building the same things we've been fighting, we're back in the same place. And we haven't spent enough time as movements to imagine and to freedom dream. I want to talk about that. I have like 25 minutes, right? Okay, because I know your time is different, so I've been watching my clock. I would love to spend like the next 20 minutes at least, and I'll give like a couple closing statements. Freedom dreaming. Can we live in that space for like 20 minutes? Can we just talk about what could be possible? And I'll invite folks again to put in the chat, what's a freedom dream for you, for your family, for the education that you or your young people might be receiving? What's your freedom dream for that? What's your freedom dream for what's possible? So you can put comments in the chat, or you can raise your hand and we'll call on you. And I know this might be a much harder question than the last one. So I want to make sure we have a little bit of wait time, because I want folks to sit and be in that mode of dreaming.
Tory, we have Amanda.
Yeah. So, for me, freedom dreaming for my children is my children having the quality special education that they need so they can be productive members of society and give back to their ability. And I say that because it's kind of like a catch-22. It's like you fight to get the proper inclusion and proper services, whatever. And the argument is always, we don't have enough funding. But the flip side of that is like, well, here's the thing. It's like an investment, even from a business standpoint, not to think that our children are investments, but you know what I mean? Looking at the school. And so if you are providing that quality education on the forefront, then over time, they will be able to be productive members of society and will be able to give back, and the world can still go round. So for me, that's my freedom dream.
Thank
you for letting me speak.
Thank you.
And then Tory from the chat, Danae says, I like to dream of day when kids with disabilities don't need IEPs because they're not considered special. They're just on the natural spectrum of the human experience, and we accommodate it already.
Yes. Fire emojis. Where's my fire emoji? Yes, thank you for that.
Lauren from New York says, I started my teaching career as a special education teacher in a fully inclusive full-day co-taught classroom. I would really like to start seeing this modeled in Colorado.
Yes, thank you. We have freedom dreams. Keep going, keep going.
Let's see what I hope I say this right. Lene, large inclusive environments where all children are treated as individuals, different abilities, not disabilities, filled with loving, compassionate adults, enough of them to give them good attention to.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Oh, I saw the shortened school days one. Did you see? So one said shortened school days, CRT not a negotiable. Both. Definitely shortened school days. As a teacher, y'all, there's no level of development where these young people should be sitting somewhere for 6 hours. That's not okay. Thank you.
And we also have Kenya, who has her hand up.
Just as I was about to speak, I got a phone call. I'm sorry. No, I was just going to say that I'm the one who wrote Shortened Days, and critical race theory is not being an option. But I also wanted to explain that I live in the state of California. In California, we have what's called the FAIR Act, which is an act in which disability and LGBTQIA is taught in the curriculum. It is not done with full implementation here in California. I would like to see it go federally, so that way that people can learn that folks with disabilities, LGBTQIA folks are here and can learn. So for me, that would be my dream.
Thank you for that. Isn't it, I just have to say this really quickly. Isn't it amazing that some of the baseline needs are met? I mean, you just basically said, can we teach people that we exist? I mean, just think about that. Can we teach people that folks, and I like the different ability, right? that they exist? Can we teach that queer folks exist? I mean, when I was a high school English teacher, I taught junior English. Walt Whitman is one of like the core of American authors that we studied. And it was controversial to share with the students that he was a gay man. It's wild.
We also have in the chat, Monique, being a mother of a neurodiverse student, I dream of him attending school where there aren't any barriers in his learning. He has the quality and the access to everything he needs. There is never a one-size-fits-all curriculum or space.
Yes, thank you. And how do we even reimagine those spaces, right? Schools, we gotta start from scratch almost, even the way they're built.
We have Shelley with her hand up.
Thank you so much, Torie, for your presentation today. It's really eye-opening and inspiring for families and educators. And I just want to say that when you talk about inclusion and having a space where people, there is no label or disability, I think it really has to start from the time that we are born into the world, and in education, the time we step across the threshold of a school. And part of that is making sure that inclusion isn't just for the child who is experiencing these disabilities or differences. It's for the entire school system. It's for the entire student body, because their peers need to learn how to engage with people who are different than they are, early on in life. And then they become, I think, more comfortable, because I know students who tell me they're really uncomfortable. They don't know what to do and how to act and what to say and how to approach differences that they aren't experiencing every day. And I have a high schooler who says doesn't see some of the children who are more severely impacted because they have a specific room, and she generally only runs into them when it's not even a passing period, but when she's taking a break from her class, going to the restroom. And she asked me, like, why don't I see them in class? And I know that they have very specific IEPs. I'm an educational advocate, so I understand the IEP process and their services. But I really think that we have to start early on bringing students into the classroom, no matter their level of disability. And we need to have those supports. That co-teaching model is really key. And we need to have those supports in the classroom from day one, so that they integrate into the classroom from the time they step across the threshold of school till the time until we put our foot in the grave. We have to have that. So I appreciate your conversation today. And I think we need to think about that as a community.
Thank you for that.
And then Torie, we also had in the chat box, Kelly, a world where we're all seen as friends, leaders, co-workers, teachers, partners, and not just inspiring, special, or sweet. And no more standardized testing, please and thank you. And then we also have Caitlin with her hand up.
So I just wanted to add on, because I do like to talk in these, just because it keeps me from getting distracted from other things at my house. But I did want to kind of add on to what Shelley was talking about, with that our young people need to learn to engage with people with exceptionalities. And, but the reason they don't know how, and they don't see them in the hallways, is because we don't know how to engage with them. And because we don't model what that engagement looks like, the young people that are around them start to take on how we act, because they deem us as normal and them as being different. And then that kind of just it's like that revolving door of how do we get out of this cycle? So I think that it starts with us. And one of my biggest pet peeves are teachers who say, it is the para's job to do this. And that drives me insane. It is not. When a student, is struggling that day, I've dealt with kids with autism, kids with Down syndrome. I've had so many different students, and I don't just send those kids out of my room because they're having a bad day. My goal is to keep them in my classroom. And when they start to melt down, to dissolve that situation so that they feel comfortable and they don't feel like they have to leave because they're going to have a meltdown if they don't. I also, like, I've had, like, when students start to get really overwhelmed and they start to, like, we call them runners. I don't know what else to call them, but they start to, like, run away because they don't know how else to respond. And so they start to just, like, leave. And I have looked plenty of paras in the face, like, I got it. Like, I want my students to know that I'm going to run after them and I'm going to chase them down and make them feel better, that I'm not just going to dump them off on somebody else because it's too much work. And I think that as an educator, we need to get away from that mindset that this student has an exceptionality or a disability and they are someone else's problem. They just happen to be in my room. And so I really hope that as the education community evolves, that those general education teachers who didn't specialize in students with disabilities start to learn to take those kids in like they would any other student. And, you know, I don't look at students who are having a bad day like, oh, they're too much work, I'm going to send them to someone else. Like, no, I try and make them feel better so that they feel safe and they can actually learn something in my class. So that was kind of like my little tidbit to add onto there, that it has to start with us or there will be no change.
Tory, you want another one from the chat box?
Yes, I was actually looking at Jen's.
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
As you said, Tory, when speaking to your elders,
Como tú dijiste, Tory, al hablar con tus mayores, puede ser que no uses la palabra queer. Es igual con las palabras de discapacidades. Recuerdo que en nuestros tiempos de nuestros padres, esas palabras eran
IDEA and ADA, etc., were passed years ago. The mindset for many is still uncomfortable seeing those with a disability.
Yeah, that one struck me just because, again, that's back to this idea of visibility and existence, you know, that somehow we kind of want to have everything sort of normalized for us, right? Like, oh, I only want to see this. You know, Bell Hooks, who is a Black feminist writer, she has this concept called white supremacist. Oh, I'm going to lose it now. White supremacist patriarchy. She has a list. Ability isn't it. I'm going to have to, I don't know why I lost it right now. But she basically lists what we consider are sort of the standards. So whiteness, straightness, men, ability, and she kind of encapsulates it in one term. And then everything that sort of isn't in that standard is other, right? And what we're talking about really here is that ingrained otherness, so ingrained that we can't even talk about someone's existence. So ingrained that we can't even see people, that we don't want them visible in society. Yeah, we got to dream past that for sure. We got to dream past that before, but for sure. The other thing I saw in the chat, or the other comment I saw in the chat, someone said, and I think you may have read it, Amber, and I wanted to respond to it and I didn't, the standardized tests.
Yeah.
So I don't know if any of you, and this is not a plug, but I don't know if any of you follow me on social media, but I was on a rant like about 2 weeks ago about standardized testing. I mean, through most of my high school teaching career, even when I was teaching AP, which really upset administrators, but even when I was teaching AP, I was encouraging my students to go through the course, but not take the test. These standardized tests are so harmful. And they're not just harmful because they're stressful, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of people don't even realize, and this is what I would take the time to try to explain to folks, a lot of people don't even realize that these standardized tests actually they are actually a legacy of the eugenics movement. Think about that. They are a vestige of the eugenics movement. And we are using them today to tell us if our young folks are normal, quote unquote, or not. It was appalling to me that a space, and this is why I question when folks say, oh, schools, education is this liberal bastion. I'm just like, just spend a couple days in a school and you will see. They are not these spaces. I mean, it was appalling to me that institutions that see themselves as forward thinking, that are tasked with the responsibility of educating generations of young folks, were using eugenics tests to decide reading levels, whether kids are gifted or not, whether they can access college or not. It's ridiculous. There's a whole book, and I'll actually put this in the resource guide, on testing that will actually take you through the history of these standardized tests and the roles that they have played in education, and also their connection to capitalism, which is a whole other thing that just a lot of folks like ACT and College Board are making a significant amount of money to tell us if we're worthy or not. And this is something I think we haven't focused enough on in our movements. We really haven't. Standardized testing has to go away. It's doing real harm in the education system.
Thanks, Tory. We have one more hand up. It's Rosa. She went away. Rosa? I can read another chat from the chat box. From Lauren, educational leaders need more training and professional development around inclusive models, co-teaching, and the resources to implement them, and provide all educators with training. No district have I ever worked with requires general education teachers to attend SPED professional development.
And that's that separation again. We only need some teachers to learn about these things, because this population is going to be over here, and then they're going to get their special teachers to work with them. Anyone else before I close us out just with some sort of calls to action, either in the chat or by raising your hand? And if Rosa came back, love to hear from Rosa.
Amber, I don't know, Norm. Norm, did you have your hand up? Yeah.
I have a dream where the first parent-teacher conference will occur before school starts. And it will be a conference where the parents will be educating the teacher instead of the teacher educating the parents. And the parents will be telling the teacher about the good of their child, and if their child has some problems, what those problems are and how they have learned to deal with them at home. And so teachers will go into the setting with their kids, knowing about the child, having a pre-bond with the child to some extent, and not being afraid of what do I do? How do I treat this child? And what are their good parts? What do they do well? What do they need challenges with? Or what do they have challenges with? And, I just think that, we try to do so much in terms of once they get in the class, but if the teachers know coming in what they have, I think it would go a very long way. So I'd like to see us figure out a way to do that.
Thank you for that. That's a beautiful dream. And I will say, I'm just making sure no one else, Amber, are we good? Before because I'll be talking, so.
Yeah, I think we're good.
Okay. So and to Norm's point, so I just want to point out the dream aspect of it again. What's beautiful about that are all the possibilities. And we know that what we're finding is this sort of entrenched system that's telling us that these possibilities cannot exist, but we know that they can. What happens sometimes is I think that we don't necessarily, and this is why the dreaming part is important, we don't necessarily know where we're supposed to end up. And a lot of folks get upset with me for making this statement, but I'm going to say it anyway. After spending 15 years in schooling, I don't even think it's fair to call it education, in schooling, when people ask me why schools haven't been reformed, why education hasn't been reformed, my answer has been for a very long time, schools are doing exactly what they're supposed to do. Based on what our society looks like, based on the normalized inequity, based on capitalism, sort of based on all of these different aspects, schools do what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to separate. They're supposed to give us, certain information, not all information, right? They're supposed to socialize us in certain ways. And on some level, I saw this happening in real time. On some level, they're supposed to condition us to this idea of like who and what is authority so that we don't question, so that we don't challenge. That's why I found issue with high school students not being taught critical thinking and to use their voice. I'm like, they're going to be 18, you're going to ask them to vote for a president, but you're not actually giving them any critical skills to be able to weigh these issues, right? So I think that when we talk about imagination, we talk about freedom dream, maybe schools aren't the future. Maybe to get to something like what Norm described, that happens somewhere outside of what we think schools are today. I was actually hoping that the pandemic disrupted schools so much that we completely divested and found something else to do. I wanted families, and I understand that there are capitalist consequences for doing this, but so badly, I wanted families to just leave schools. I thought if it's possible, it's only going to happen during the pandemic when people have been forced to figure out how to work from home anyway, that there's going to be some kind of alternative, right? But I want to leave you with this idea that as hard as it might be for us to imagine a world without schools as they are today, the dreams that we all have for what's possible for us, our families, our young people, can build something so much better. Our resources are paying for schools anyway, so this is not a resource issue. We could build something so much better, so much more suitable, something that gives young people power and voice and choice, something that teaches them how to take up space. We could be in a world that looks different, but we have to have the moral courage to build that world. Young people deserve the best of us so that they can be better than us. Thank y'all for listening to me today. I appreciate being in community with you all.
Thank you, Tory. Thank you for that powerful presentation, and thank you for kicking off the 2022 Conference of Inclusive Education. It was such a delight to have you here. So we have a 1 hour break before the first breakout session begins. This will give you an opportunity to check out our conference partners, our exhibitors, the lunch and learn with Beth Mao, and many more. So hope to see you in an hour. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Tory.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tory. You rocked it as always.
Thank you. Thank you.
How do we get in contact with Tory?
You'll give them my information, right?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
We had some people ask about your social media. So what social media did you want me to put out there? You have critical mentoring.
You can just put like my T Weiston. My Instagram is probably my busiest, but I'm on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram.
Okay, perfect.
And Tory is going to do an, what do you call it, an after?
Yeah, I'm going to put a little guide together.
That we'll post onto Hooba.
Yeah.
I dropped her Instagram and LinkedIn in the chat already. So if you want to look there, it's there.
Perfect.
Thanks, Shelly.
Thank you all so much.
All right, Tory, take care.
You too.
Keep dreaming, everyone. We'll see you in a bit.